We'll start in the Western Conference, and when you look at some of the bold predictions that have been out there, I mean, where do you start in terms of looking at some of these bold predictions? Like Bruce Boudreau to me is one that stood out, and I've received a lot of feedback on social media, Colby, so far when I made the bold prediction in today's story, which you can now read on dailyfaceoff.com, which is Bruce Boudreau will be the first coaching casualty of this season. And you look at it and you say, well, look at the job he did last year. Look at how that Canucks team finished. How could that possibly be your thought process? And I'll explain it. One, it seemed to me like there was some friction there between Boudreau and the front office at the beginning of the offseason, and that he asked for and did not receive an extension from the Canucks. He had originally signed his deal for 1 season and a half. So the half was to finish last year and this full season. And then I look at the Canucks and their camp. It's been really rather underwhelming for a team that has a lot to prove. Their best players have not been their best players. And that's really the big thing with Vancouver. If their stars aren't playing, what do you have left from the rest of their group? And not only that, but there just hasn't seemed to be much push from guys that should be banging down the door for that team to make that roster. Colby, what do you have in terms of a bold prediction for the West?
Well, just to clean up a little bit on what you were talking about, for these younger players, which are really the stars in Vancouver, Frank, training camp should be about dominating. These are not players who have been in the league for 10 or 12 years and they're using training camp just to, feel their way through. Like I watch Patrick Kane in these preseason games, and I'm not worried about Patrick Kane. When the puck drops against Detroit on opening night, he's going to be Patrick Kane. But I don't know that about Hughes, and I don't know that about Pedersen. These are young players who really do need to show up in the preseason. So I agree with you on that, Frank. I think it's a little troubling, some of the word coming out of Vancouver, and I think Boudreau could definitely be on the hot seat. But I'm going to go a little south, and I'm going to say Las Vegas Golden Knights. And I think a lot of people are writing them off because of their goaltending situation. I think Logan Thompson is going to have a good season for them. I think Bruce Cassidy is a very talented coach at putting structure in place for his team. I spent 4 seasons with him. I was very difficult to play for him, but he knows what he's doing as far as setting the structure. He's got John Stevens running the defense, who's another guy who's a details coach. I think they'll protect Logan Thompson. I think Jack Eichel's highly motivated talking to him throughout the offseason. And ultimately, I think Vegas is going to be in the top spot of that Pacific Division.
Were there any other predictions that I made in the West that you didn't like?
Yes. You made a handful of predictions in the West that I did not like. And we'll go with, I lost my notes here. Where did your 32 predictions go here? We're going to have to go back to that on the East Coast because I exited out of the window
That's
and
fine.
I had it all written down. So
let's talk about some bold
one.
predictions that I made in the East. And when you take a look at Austin Matthews, that's the one guy so far ahead of time. Like before you should even realistically be talking about it, Austin Matthews has 2 full seasons remaining on his contract, the 5-year deal that he signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs out of entry level. And yet everyone's wondering, is he going to bolt? Everyone keeps saying, what about the Arizona Coyotes? Will he eventually go home? I think Austin Matthews put a lot of that to bed during training camp when he said, Toronto is my home. I have absolutely zero doubt that Austin Matthews is going to remain a Toronto Maple Leaf for a long time. And I'm backing that up with my bold prediction in that he ends up signing the NHL's first ever max contract, 8 years, $16.7 million. So that's 20% of the salary cap and the max term. It'd be the first one ever. Brad Richards did sign for 20% in 2005, but in that case, he did not sign for the max term. And that also rounds out to a very tidy $134 million. I think some of the thought process with Matthews is maybe he's a little bit of a trendsetter, a guy that would sign a 5-year deal, maybe to maximize his earnings. But even if you do 2 5-year deals, that's $70 million, which is still $16 million. You are only saving or earning about $6 million extra dollars. So I think in this case, maybe you take the security and sign for a major deal if you're number 34 in Toronto.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see Austin Matthews leaving Toronto anytime soon. Now, I do think there's an opportunity for him to look at what's been going on in the NBA with superstar players over the last 5 or so years and look to a shorter opportunity. A guy like him, I don't know him personally, Frank, so I don't know if he's going to value security or not. To me, he reads as a guy who's willing to roll the dice and he's willing to bet on himself. So I think he's going to make a lot of money either way he goes. And ultimately, I agree. I think he stays in in Toronto. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give you what I think is a bold prediction. And I think a lot of people probably will laugh at this and say they can't win in the playoffs. But I think this is the year Toronto does win in the playoffs. I think they're going to represent the Eastern Conference in the finals. I think that playoff series against Tampa Bay is reminiscent of teams in the past that have had to have those growing pains, whether it was St. Louis who struggled, whether it was some of the years where Chicago would lose in the first round and then you'd see them reload and come back the year after. So I think some of those growing pains that they faced last year will ultimately help them get over the hump. And I think we will see Toronto in the Stanley Cup Final and maybe even an all-Canadian Stanley Cup Final this year. We shall see.
Toronto, Edmonton would be unbelievable in terms of drama, and also to see the talent on the ice. If you were to get a Connor McDavid going up against an Austin Matthews, I actually do have one Canadian team in the final in my bold predictions. The Calgary Flames, I have them losing to the Carolina Hurricanes in the final. That's my bold prediction, and you can read them all on dailyfaceoff.com.